Hello and welcome to Lesson 4 of the Year 7 and Year 8 English Home Learning videos from the Hastings Academy. Today we will be carrying on reading The Pedestrian, the short story by Ray Bradbury. And before we begin, I just want to go through the section that we read last lesson in Lesson 3. So what happened in that section? Well, we learned that people do come out of their houses during the day to go to work in Mr. Leonard Mead's neighborhood, even though he doesn't see anyone on his walks in the night. He does share the details that it's very busy on the roads when it's working time, but everyone stays indoors at night. Mr. Mead is then stopped by a police car that shines a very bright light on him, similar to this picture over here. And he's quite stunned because he never sees many police cars at all. Actually, there's only one left in the city because crime is so low, because people stay in their homes and watch TV if they're not at work. And then finally, the police car, which is the only one, starts to question Mr. Mead about why he's out walking and acting like that he's possibly doing something wrong. So we start to have a bit of tension built up in the story, and that's what we'll be looking at today. So, to begin with, our do it now is to look at this picture here, which is linked to the coronavirus situation that's been going on across the world. And just look at it carefully and try to pick out three things or three details that you see that might suggest or create tension or show that there's some conflict here. It could be something that the people in the picture are wearing, what seems to be going on. You can make any guesses. There's no wrong answers. Just use your own ideas. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And if you finish that quite quickly, then try to complete the challenge, which is to write 2 sentences describing what might be happening in this scene. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, so feel free to pause if you need some extra time, but just I thought I would go through some of my personal ideas that I wrote down when looking at this picture. The first thing that I wrote down was just face masks. That's not something I think maybe a few months ago we were used to seeing people wearing out in the public, and they could suggest in this picture, that there's a dangerous disease like the coronavirus around, and that people need to protect themselves from catching it. The second thing I wrote down is that this person here, although I'm not sure, they might be some kind of police officer or security guard, and sometimes people are intimidated or scared by them, so that might create a bit of tension, although for the most part they're there to keep people safe. And then the last thing I wrote down was just freedom. It seems like maybe these two people, this mom and a daughter, are out for a walk, maybe to get fresh air, but they might be being questioned about that or feel like they can't do things that they used to do. So maybe the fact that there isn't as much freedom anymore. And all three of those things are just things that could link to conflict or tension, because tension is something that can, make someone who's looking at a picture or reading a story feel, either scared about what's going on or worried or anxious, or just have a sense that something isn't quite right or the way it usually is. Okay, so we're going to move on to our keywords for today. And just as I go through them, try to repeat them in the definition after me and also write them down on whatever you're working on, whether you're writing on paper, typing on your phone or a tablet or a laptop. Any way you want to do the work is fine. So our first word is phonograph, and phonograph means a type of speaker or recording. Our second word is accusation. Accusation means a statement saying someone has done something wrong or broken the law. And our last word is faintly. Faintly means something that's done in a weak or quiet way. So just make sure you've copied out those 3 words and their definitions, and feel free to pause the video if you need to work at your own pace. So now I'd like you to choose one of the words, they're just here up in the left-hand corner, and make your vocabulary ping pong mind map, which is what we usually do in lessons. You only have to choose one. If you want to do more than one, that's great. And write that one word in the middle of your mind map. Write the definition again so it sticks in your mind. Write a sentence of your own using the word. Try to think of a word that means the same thing as it, okay, so the synonym. And then the challenge, try to think about and consider what word type it is. So is it an adjective, noun, a verb, or an adverb? So I'll give you a bit of time to complete your mind map. Okay, so we're moving on. If you need to pause to work at your own pace, that's absolutely fine. So the next section of the story we're going to read today goes through what happens after this police car has stopped Mr. Mead. And we're looking at tension. So how is a feeling of worry or anxiety or fear about what happens to Mr. Mead created in this section of the story? So I'm going to read it through, you read it through with me, and then we are going to complete a task at the end of this section. "No profession," said the phonograph voice, hissing. "What are you doing out?" "Walking," said Leonard Mead. "Walking? Just walking," he said simply, but his face felt cold. "Walking, just walking. Walking?" "Yes, sir." "Walking where? For what?" "Walking for air, walking to sea." "Your address?" 11 South St. James Street. "And there is air in your house? You have an air conditioner, Mr. Mead?" "Yes." "And you have a viewing screen in your house to see with?" "No." "No?" There was a crackling quiet that in itself was an accusation. "Are you married, Mr. Mead?" "No." Now, in this section, the police the police car begins to ask Mr. Mead quite a few questions, and it takes on, a darker tone, a bit of a meaner tone here. So we've got 3 questions here where what you need to do is just look back in this section of the text and find a quote or a word if it tells you for a word. And I'll just read those out and then give you time to find your answer. So A, what word in the first line, so you would need to look in the first line of the text on this screen, describes the way the voice coming from the police car sounds? B, find the word that is repeated 2 or more times in this section of the story to show that a simple everyday action is seen as strange in the world that Mr. Mead lives in. And then C, what does Mr. Mead not have in his house that shocks the police? So I'll give you some time to get your answers down. All the answers are in here. All you have to do is find a word or a quote that gives the answer and write it down. Okay, so feel free to pause the video if you need some extra time. I'm just going to go through some possible answers. So for A, what word in the first line describes the way the voice coming from the police car sounds? You'd only be looking at this first line here. And there are 2 possible words that you could pick out. One of them is hissing, because hissing is quite an evil sound linked to a snake, and it sounds quite unnatural for a human. And then the other word is phonograph, and we looked at the definition of that for our key words, and that is almost like it sounds like a recording, like it's fake. So phonograph or hissing, anything around that is absolutely fine for question A. Question B, find the word that is repeated 2 or more times in this section of the story to show that a simple everyday action is seen as strange in this world. And the word that would be is walking, okay? We have that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, numerous times, keeps on going. And walking is the answer to B, because all he's doing is going for a walk, which is something that even we're allowed to do as much as we want to now in this country, even with coronavirus, and he's being questioned about why is he outside his house, why is he going for a walk, almost like he's done something wrong. And then C, what does Mr. Mead not have in his house that shocks the police? So down here in this section, they ask him about 2 things. They ask him if he has an air conditioner, which in the United States, which is where this story is probably set, is something that a lot of people have in their homes in areas where it's hot. So he does say he has an air conditioner, but the thing that shocks the police is the viewing screen. He does not have a viewing screen. So if you wrote down anything linked to viewing screen or TV, TV is probably what they're talking about here. It's just in this future world, it's called a viewing screen. So we'll move on to the next section of the story and carry on. Read along with me and then we'll complete task 2. Not married, said the police voice behind the fiery beam. The moon was high and clear among the stars, and the houses were gray and silent. Nobody wanted me, said Leonard Mead with a smile. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. Leonard Mead waited in the cold night. Just walking, Mr. Mead. Yes. But you haven't explained for what purpose. I explained. For air and to see and just to walk. Have you done this often? Every night for years. The police car sat in the center of the street with its radio throat faintly humming. Well, Mr. Meade, it said. Is that all? He asked politely. Yes, said the voice. Here. There was a sigh and a pop. The back door of the police car sprang wide. Get in. Wait a minute, I haven't done anything. Get in. I protest. So in this section, things become a bit scarier. The police car, the voice in the police car starts kind of shouting at Mr. Meade, and being quite rude to him and not accepting his answers about why he's going for a walk. And then things take a turn for the worse when they start telling him to get into the car. And we're not sure why or where they intend to take him. So we have 4 questions down here, true or false. All you need to do is just write true or false, but you would probably need to look back up here and reread sections of the text to make sure you're getting the right idea. So A, Mr. Meade has a wife. B, the police think that Mr. Meade is suspicious or guilty in some way. C, there might not be any people inside the police car. And D, Mr. Meade never fights back against the police car's requests or instructions. So I'll give you a couple minutes to get your true or false answers down, and then we'll go through them. Feel free to pause if you need extra time. Okay, so we'll go through the answers. Pause if you need some more time. A, Mr. Meade has a wife. Well, if you look up here in the first section, it says not married, which, links the fact that he doesn't have a wife. So that answer for A is false. And it's almost like they expect everyone to be married, everyone to fit into a certain stereotype, and they're a bit shocked that Mr. Meade isn't. B, the police think that Mr. Meade is suspicious or guilty in some way. And for B, just through reading this section here, that is true. Because they start being quite rude to him and shouting. We have all these exclamation marks like don't speak unless you're spoken to, things like that. And they're kind of treating him as if he is guilty or can't be trusted, almost talking to him like he's a small child. So that is definitely true for question B. Then C, there might not be any people inside the police car. Now, this one, it never says anything specific, but there are some suspicious details, so that it's a voice. And we had the details earlier in the other section saying that it sounded like a phonograph or a recording. And we never see any faces described. We don't, have anything specific about who might be in the front seat. It's just like the police car is kind of on its own, like there's a voice coming out of a speaker and then the door pops open. Nobody actually gets out of the car to open that door. So the answer to question C is true. We're not sure, but there might not be anyone in that car. And then D, Mr. Meade never fights back against the police car's requests or instructions. Well, to find the answer to that one, we look down here in the bottom. And when he's told to get into the car, he does say with an exclamation mark, which means he could be shouting back, I haven't done anything. And then when they tell him to get in again, he says, I protest, which means I'm actually saying I don't want to do this. I don't think this is right. So D is false. He does actually try to fight back verbally and say, listen, this isn't fair. Why are you taking me in the police car? Okay. So for the next section, we're just looking at tension in a little bit more detail. So I have just a simple definition of tension up here. So tension creates a feeling of worry or fear in the reader. You may be worried about the character. and you may get a sense that they are in danger, or you expect something frightening to happen. It may not be something huge, but just a small feeling of tension is enough. And what's happened in the section of the story that we read today is that, Mr. Mead was out for a walk, enjoying himself, even though he's extremely lonely, and then this police car stops him, and things start getting a little bit suspicious and could be dangerous, because he hasn't done anything wrong and he's being treated like a criminal. So for task 3, what I'd like you to do is look carefully at these 6 quotes down here in these boxes, and copy out only three quotes from the ones down here that most powerfully create tension or show that something bad might happen to Mr. Mead, or maybe we should be a bit worried about him, or maybe he's feeling scared in that situation. So read through each one, and copy out the 3 that you think are the most tense. There is no wrong answer. There's a couple in there that should stand out to you as not being that tense at all. But I'll give you some time to read the 6 quotes and write your 3 chosen ones down. Don't worry about getting anything wrong. Your ideas are absolutely fine. And for the challenge, if you complete this really quickly, go back to the previous section of the video where we read through the story and find one more quote of your own that's not within these 6 that also creates tension in some way. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, so feel free to pause if you need some extra time. And I'm just going to go through these quotes and some reasons why they may or may not create tension. So our first quote here, wait a minute, I haven't done anything. Yes, this quote I think definitely creates tension if you chose it as one of yours, because we get the feeling that Mr. Mead is being treated like he's done something wrong, and even being possibly taken away, but he hasn't done anything. He's innocent. So that definitely creates tension because we wonder why he's being treated like that and what might happen to him. Our second quote here, well, Mr. Mead, it said. That's just, the police car voice speaking to Mr. Mead. There's nothing really tense there specifically in this quote, so that's not the best one to choose. This one here said the phonograph voice hissing. And we looked at this before, but the fact that the voice coming from the police car sounds quite strange, like it's recorded and it has a hissing sound. It doesn't sound like there's a real person in there with real feelings that even cares about Mr. Mead. And it's slightly creepy because hissing can also be an evil sound linked to snakes. So that definitely would create tension. It's very suspicious. It's kind of worrying. Our next quote here, the back door of the police car sprang wide. Yes, this quote can also create tension because, number one, no one actually gets out of the car to open the door, which is a little bit strange and quite worrying. And then also, when the back door of a police car opens, what happens is usually they want to put someone inside of it and take them away, and that person is possibly Mr. Mead. So that does create tension because we wonder what's going on. Is there a person inside the car? And also, why are they taking Mr. Mead away? Is he in danger? Is he going to be treated fairly? So that definitely creates some anxiety in the reader. This quote here, don't speak unless you're spoken to, with an exclamation point at the end. That definitely creates tension because the police car is now speaking to Mr. Mead like he's a child, like he's definitely done something wrong, and it's quite rude and very harsh, and quite angry. So yeah, that creates tension because we wonder, why he's being treated this way. What's going to happen to him? And do they even care about the fact that he's just walking? He just wants some fresh air. There's nothing wrong. And then lastly, walking, said Leonard Mead. That doesn't have a whole lot of tension in it because it doesn't really link to anything threatening. Yes, he is talking about what he's doing, but there's not a whole lot that's anxious or scary about this. And well done if you completed the challenge and found one of your own quotes from the story. We're going to move on to our last task now, which is to write a P's paragraph, something that you would do a lot of in English lessons in school, and that hopefully you'll be doing when we return. So we just have a question about tension. So how does Bradbury, that's the writer, create tension in this section of the pedestrian? And to answer this question, you would use one of your quotes from task 3. And if you need to look back at the slide, that's fine. You don't have to go back and reread the story. Just use your quotes, one of your quotes from task 3 to do this. So it shouldn't be that stressful. And use these sentence starters to help you. So Bradbury creates a feeling of tension when, and just describe what's happening is, the car door opening, is Mr. Mead saying he did nothing wrong. So just try to put into your own words what's happening in your quote, and then use your quote. This is shown in the quote for your evidence. And then for your explore, this implies. So what does your quote imply? What does it imply Mr. Mead is feeling? What does it imply might be dangerous or scary, or something to worry about in this situation? There's no wrong answer for this, but try to make this sentence 15 or more words long. It'll really help you go into detail. And then lastly, zoom in. So choose a word from your quote up here and try to say something else that it suggests, and just look a little bit more detail about the words that Mr. Bradbury is choosing in his writing. And then lastly, for the challenge, if you found that paragraph quite easy, complete a second paragraph exploring another quote. If you want to use the same sentence starters here, that's fine. If you want to really push yourself, try to adapt it to be a little bit different. Use your own sentence starters for point, evidence, explore, and zoom in. And when you have written your paragraph or paragraphs, please send them to your English teacher. All of those details should be on class charts. And good luck.